back to day 2 of devcom. My name is Jonas. I'm here the stage moderator, and with me is Andrea Fricke. She is game designer at Ubisoft Mainz, and today we'll have a really interesting talk, I think as well, is she will talk about the DLC Lands of the Lion. And so with further ado, Andrea, the stage is yours, and have fun.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Welcome everybody to the talk Anno 1800, designing 3 years of post-launch for a long-running strategy game. So the Anno series has a 20-year-old history with 7 main installments, and up until the most recent game, there was at maximum 1 year of post-launch content with DLCs or add-ons. Anno 1800, though, is currently in the 3rd year of post-launch, and if you're curious to find out how that was pulled off, you've come to the right talk. So I'm Andrea Fricke, that's my name. I'm in Ubisoft Mainz since 2018 as a game designer, and I'm in the game dev industry myself since 2010. And I really grew up with Anno myself, so I played the first one, Anno 1602, as a child with my sister, and then furthermore Annos, and now it's really super interesting because, now I'm kind of on the other side of the curtain, behind the scenes and developing new Anno games for new kids or grown-ups to play Anno. So let me first of all give you a short introduction into the Anno brand if you're not super familiar with it, so that you just have more context for this talk. So there are 7 main installments of the years that have been released over 23 years and that already also won numerous rewards. And let me tell you about the game pillars. So of course, first of all, a game pillar of Anno is city building. You are building residences, marketplaces, pubs, or farms and factories. And you're always progressing in the game through different residential tiers. So it's always about starting with lower tiers up and making your way up to higher society tiers and progressing through them. And how do you do that? By fulfilling their needs. So all residents in an Anno game have needs that they have, for example, food or clothes or something to drink and so on, or luxury products. That you need to fulfill in order to make them progress through these residential tiers. And how do you fulfill these needs? Well, you're building all of your farms, of course, and your factories, but also one important aspect is the fertilities on different islands. So on your starting island, you may have your hops and your red pepper fertility, but you're missing grain fertility. So as soon as you want to work with this product, you have to go to another island. So I think that's why somehow it's also more an empire builder than a city builder, because you're not just building one city, but you're building a big empire on several islands and continents on different climate regions as well. And how do you reach these different islands? Of course, with ships and maybe also with naval warfare. I mean, there's always got to be a ship on an Anno cover, right? And if an island is already taken that you would like to have, you might have to fight the other opponent that is sitting on that island with naval warfare. Some Anno games also had land combat, but not every one of them had it. Second to last is the trading and the diplomacy. So in Anno games, it's also always about traders, different NPCs that are sitting on islands and that are selling, for example, construction material or helpful items, or that you could sell excess goods to. And in diplomacy, you are, for example, negotiating for these trade rights on alliance or trying to get that much needed ceasefire with the annoying pirates. And all in all, I think Anno is about exploring different centuries. I mean, that's already in the name of the game, right? There's always the year number after the title. So you're exploring these different centuries along with their respective cultures, the people how they lived at the time, the products they consumed at the time, and what the technology was at that time. So here's a short overview over Anno 1800's post-launch timeline. So the vanilla game came out in 2019. And in that year, also, we already released Season Pass 1 with the DLC Sunken Treasure, Botanica, and The Passage. Season 2 happened in 2020 with Seed of Power, Bright Harvest, and Land of Lions. And Season 3 in this year is releasing with Docklands, Tourist Season, and The High Life. And The High Life is actually coming out the very next Tuesday, so 31st of August. So let me first of all talk to you about general game design ideas that influenced the DLCs on a broader spectrum. So Anno's post-launch can be described in two ways, I would say. First of all, it was about adding long-loved favorites of the team or features and topics that just didn't make it into the vanilla release. That were really the main ideas often came from that, or from listening to the community. We, for example, have our own Anno Union, our own forum and blog and news site, or from other social media, where we listen to the community feedback and also put that into the post-launch and to fulfill their wishes. And interestingly, these two things rarely excluded each other. So Anno Union threads about wishes for the next season were really often filled with exactly the themes or buildings or worlds that we wanted to do or that we were doing already. That was really the case with Docklands, for example, with hotels and tourism, with an Arctic-inspired region, with an African-inspired region. What is also our main drivers when developing post-launch content is to fulfill different player types. So we try to fulfill these player types wishes with every other DLC, and that is namely something for beauty builders, people that want to decorate everything very nicely and build symmetric alleys or have a lot of beautiful museums and zoos, or something for record builders that is mostly then in terms of population. So people that aspire to get 500,000, 1 million, 2 million population in their whole Anno game. Something that can be introduced at the start of the game, in the mid of the game, or at the end of the game to spread out the content over the whole progress of the game. Something that can be easily picked up and integrated into player cities, or something that requires intense planning and optimization. So we always strive to include these directions and these principles into as many DLC, as many of them into every DLC as possible. So, as I said already in the beginning, previous Anno games received only 1 year of post-launch updates. Here, as you see, for example, with Anno 1404 or 2070. But seeing the reception of Anno 1800 Season 1 being so good, Season 2 was really decided close to Season 1's end, and same with Season 3. We thought we'd end the story of Anno 1800 with Land of Lions, but people wanted more, and Anno 1800 regularly draws in new players and has a high retention for returning players as well, so we did it. So for the main part of this talk, I will be focusing on Land of Lions. That was the 6th DLC in total in Season 2. And I will tell you a lot about the game design principles, then the ideas and the processes that were behind it. So Season 1 kind of already established that the final DLC of a season is the best and biggest one. And this expectation, of course, had to be fulfilled. So Land of Lions was really supposed to be the biggest DLC that we made. What was the goal of this DLC? So Land of Lions was designed to be a new region for players to explore that offers unique building challenges, so really a different way in how you build there, and ultimately to introduce a way to research items. And of course, first, the world has to be chosen. We wanted to explore a region inspired by the African continent, but instead of going to a sand desert, we opted for the savanna region because that offers more possibilities than a pure sand desert. And in this new region, we wanted to develop a regional gameplay, some fundamental difference to how you play in the other regions, something, of course, where it's about turning the drylands green. I mean, that's very believable, right? That's what you would expect in such a region. So Anno 1404 already had the norias that were wells that created circular irrigated land around it. But of course, we didn't want to do the same thing once again. So instead, we went for irrigation canals that the player has to build. And then farm fields and animal enclosures would have to be on irrigated land in order to work. So we developed a prototype very early for this, of the irrigation feature, with beautiful block outs and just not these beautiful textures and just plain colors and so on, and play tested it. And in this stage, the main designers were often talking about if it's not going to be too easy, you just drag your irrigation canal there and make some skeleton shape, and then you just feed the farm fields into it. What's so hard about this? But then we observed team members playing the prototype and really saw how some definitely struggled to at least feel confident with their irrigation planning skills. So we also had a couple of internal play tests, and I have here a snippet from a survey for you. And that was, one of these things where you have to say if you fully disagree, partly agree, or fully agree to a statement. And the first statement was, in the beginning, I knew how to efficiently plan my irrigation canals. And you definitely see how orange and how red this bar is, because, in the beginning, they didn't feel good with it. But after playing with it longer, I knew how to efficiently plan my irrigation canals. And now all of a sudden it's quite blue, right? And I think that's a very good example of easy to learn and hard to master. So at the beginning, you feel like you're not really doing so well, but really after taking your time longer with it and learning it and playing around with it more, the feeling really changed in our colleagues. And we definitely thought that's transferable then to the real final players. So no, it will not be too easy. We definitely found out, and we were really then happy with that system. So after having nailed down the irrigation canals, the question was what other city buildings need water, because the irrigation system shouldn't only be a thing in the farm areas, but also within the city. Here in the screenshot you see, oh, wonderful, in the whole farm area you have to use the irrigation canals and so on, but in the city that feature is not happening. It's not taking place in the city, and we didn't want that because we really felt we would miss out too much. So the classic first building in Anno is a marketplace. Should this need water? That would make sense, right? But then the first challenge before building any residences and building up any city structure would actually be to figure out the irrigation system right now and to plan where your canals should be. And we had learned from the passage where it had there was a similar heater functionality where you had to distribute heat via the streets, that such a new feature being required as the very first thing to do is too much. The flow is much better instead if players can start with a small settlement, which already attracts the first residents in a safe way without them moving out 5 seconds later, and then dig deeper into the regional specialties. But what other building would make sense in terms of reality and believability and building challenge to require water? We decided for the fire station. So fire stations in Anno 1800 have a range how far they can go to do their service. And like that, players would need to plan their city layout accordingly and bring the water canals to some extent into their cities. So here on the left, in the middle of the screenshot, you see on the right this highlighted irrigation canal. And with this animation here, you see that then you have to bring the canals also into the city, connected to the fire station. And then the building challenge also takes place within the city. So with having that completely nailed down in all areas of the islands that the players would use, is the next big topic is, which directly follows the creation of the world, is to come up with residents, the goods they require, and the production chains to produce these goods. Let's start with the residents, of course. So there are several quality standards or goals that these features have to achieve. So narratively, it's very important for us that the people that lived in such an area are represented in a proper and interesting way. Here, in this example, in the back, you see the shepherd as the young and light-hearted folks that have a lot of interest in poetry and so on, and taking care of their cattle. And the elders are the wise old matriarchs who deliver a lot of wise words to you and to the shepherds as well, of course. Secondly, it's about finding goods that the majority of players would expect to see in this area. It's not so much for us about realism, but more about believability. So the goods shouldn't be too far off or only believable for history experts. And moreover, it's also very good if the goods can tell a story. With these goods, for example, like the elder needs glasses to read her scriptures, which she does at the monastery that is illuminated by beautiful lanterns. Thirdly, in terms of landscape, it's very important to us to pick plants that look differently from a bird's eye view. So here on the left we have flags flax seeds. Then in the middle we have hibiscus for tea, and on the right you see indigo. Imagine if we had picked now red roses for some perfume extract, for example, and then also pink hibiscus. That wouldn't have been a good idea because players cannot differentiate them on first glance from this bird's eye perspective that you usually have in Anno. And the same, of course, also goes for Animal Farm. So the shape and the main color of that should also be as different as possible. Next, it's about coastal buildings. So it's also important for us to balance coastal buildings with land buildings, because for the longest time, we only had one coastal building that you see here, salt, and it just looks super boring because all of your beaches were only filled with your trading post and then maybe a depot or so, but the rest would be salt, 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 salt. So that looked super boring, and there was no variety in there. So we had another chain of products, namely the spicy stew, that consisted from was made out of meat until then. But then we thought, hey, let's switch it out with seafood as an ingredient. So we added the new seafood building, and then we had a better balance of coastal buildings. Fifth in line is to design production chains with increasing complexity. So as you see here, the very first chain on the top left, goat milk, I mean, that's not really a chain because it's just one element, right? But that also counts in our terms of production chains. Then you have the longer chain of the embroidered clothes made from flax and then linen fabric, and then the final clothes. You see ceramics, then tapestry, and at the very end you see the lanterns. And I think it's pretty easy to believe that, the hardest chain should come last, but also that it should include one completely new good, which in this case is the beeswax that you make the candles from. So that is also one of our quality goals, that with a very final chain, that not just the final production building is added to it, so you would just have to slap down the lantern factory and then everything else would already be there. No, we want the player to also build one new input good completely. And in this case, you even need the fertility for the beeswax. So you might need a second island for it to make the candles, and then combine it with the glass and to the final lanterns. And as a side goal for this is to cleverly reuse goods in production chains. So you see here with these examples of the production chains where the goods are reused. And that's also a very elegant way, I think, to reduce also the content and to make players also reuse their production buildings and their workforces and so on that they have on their buildings, on their island, sorry. So second to last is to spread the islands and namely the right amount of fertilities to spread it over several islands. So the first few production chains shouldn't require to already settle on a second island, but more at the start of the second residential tier, the elders, then that's where we how we lay out the fertilities, that you only need to go to a second island in the start of the second residential tier. And last but not least, something for the 3D art. It's about finding goods for us that can be portrayed well in its workshop or in the factory, because it's always better if the user can see the input product being used and the final product being produced on the outside of the building, instead of seeing just a closed-off cube, where you cannot look inside, like, hey, what are they actually doing inside of there? And here on the left, you see it, I think, very well with the embroidered clothes. You see cloth hanging around there in different colors, and most importantly, also the colors of the building fit to the colors of the icon. And also with the hibiscus tea, you see the red petals there being cooked in these round bowls, and that also has a similar shape to the icon. I think that's also very clever. Yeah, and like that, we developed a compelling and unique new region to play in with its completely own style and challenge. So now we have a flowing economy within NBESA. That's the name of the region. We gave it to it within the game. But that alone wouldn't be enough. After all, why are you doing all of this if it doesn't feed back into the rest of your gameplay, into your home region that is named the Old World? So now we're coming to the second part of the Land of Lions DLC game design, which is everything that happens then in your home region. So as I outlined in the beginning, apart from creating a new region for players to have fun in, we wanted to tackle item randomness with this DLC. Up until then, players could mostly re-roll for items at traders, play expeditions or play quests, or do World's Fair exhibitions to get items from pools, but you would still get a random item, so you're not 100% sure what you're gonna get. And on top of that, the urge for something that feels like science was high for the players. So we came up with the Research Institute, where players would be able to research items directly. But how could we link that to the Mbesa region with their shepherds and elders? Does that fit? Yeah, I mean, we made it fit because we created the character of the scholar. He's an aspiring student from Mbesa, adept and knowledgeable, and he's traveling the world. And he would be the new residential tier in the player's home region that enables research. And yeah, I think that has many benefits because first of all, you have the narrative connection between Mbesa and the home region. Because he's a scholar, we could make this compelling new campus architecture style that fits the scholars and a style that we didn't have before at all. And lastly, by giving the scholars needs of Mbesen goods, which connect them to their own home country, it closes the circle very well. So how does it work with the research feature? So by attracting scholars, players enable the research feature. But with what should research be paid? With regular money? Players already have tons of that. They could directly afford everything because usually for all of the DLCs, you can integrate them into any running save game. So you might already have played 50 or 100 hours and then you can just activate the DLC and then you would really have a lot of money already and it's not going to be worth so much anymore. So we introduced a new currency, research points. Everybody starts at square one, no uneven distributions among players. That's really the way to go, we thought. And how you get research points? So they should be granted over time from fulfilling needs, because that's also how you get regular money by fulfilling certain needs. By this need, you get so and so much money. So we really thought, let's do the same thing with research points. And needs were supposed to be a mix of the kind of the best of needs of the whole game. Products from Mbesa, they fit because the scholars want goods from their home country, and even more new exclusive products in the old world that were really only made for the scholars. And that means new production chains for Anno players, which is always a good thing, right? So all in all, the needs are a mixture between old world and Mbesa and the new world. So all regions are included. Mwah, fabulous. So that's really all you can ask for, I think. Okay, now you're generating research points. How do you use them? How do you put them to a good use? So with the research points, players can research now specific items, basically all items from the whole game. But that posed another question. If scholar houses only require the regular construction material and money, players could build dozens and hundreds of them easily. So you could already, drag your rectangle, build 100 scholar houses, and you would directly get your first research points because you have to fulfill some needs in order for them to stay intact. So most importantly, scholar houses wouldn't feel valuable like that for us. So how did we tackle this? We introduced building permits, a limitation like a voucher, so to speak, that you need to place every single scholar house. And more permits would have to be researched as well. And of course, we give you some starting permits to start the whole cycle. So the more scholar houses you have built, the quicker research points are generated. And you can reinvest them to claim more scholar permits, to invest them into more scholar houses, which in turn gives you more research points. So like this, players have to find the balance, how long they want to reinvest research points into generating them quicker, and when to spend them on the actual benefits of the game. And I think that is a very interesting parallel that we drew from board games. So a lot of board games have a similar mechanic where players can either reinvest their resources to generate more resources or turn their resources into victory points. And then the challenge is to find the sweet spot when to stop reinvesting and when to start claiming victory points. Okay, so now players can research existing old items. Yay! Wouldn't that be a bit of a letdown? Because after all, that wouldn't be new content, but only new ways to get existing content. So we even went further and we created major discoveries. And major discoveries are also vouchers, so to speak, to build certain buildings, ships, or to use a very special and exclusive feature. Because there were several possibilities still left open in the game, which should be the perfect match for major discoveries. For example, we had introduced the biggest ship to date in the previous DLC, and the ship was named the Great Eastern, but you could only possess one of it, kind of like your exclusive second flagship. But now one major discovery allows you to build more Great Easterns, one per voucher. Another example is the clay pits. So, islands have their clay pits pre-placed. And if they are in your way, where you want to have your city or a new production district, you have to build around them because you cannot move them out of your way. So we made another discovery that lets you move a clay pit to anywhere else on this island that you like. And the third example, coffee is the infamous good in Anno 1800 because its consumption is extremely high, especially among the investors. They drink it all the time. But coffee can only produce in the New World, the other session which is smaller, so you have much more space limitation there. So we made a major discovery that lets you build an advanced coffee production, an alternative coffee production in the old world, which is also on top of that made from local ingredients, malt from grain. So there are even no trade routes required. So you can directly produce them where your consumers are. And like that, the player really has a lot of possibilities because they can mix and match the coffee production, for example, as well. They could leave some in the New World and then mix it with some alternative coffee production here in your research session, the Old World. Yeah, so that is the end of the Land of Lions section. I hope you liked that. And as the next DLC, we have Seat of Power. So as a smaller glimpse, I want to tell you about this DLC that was the fourth one in line. So what were the goals for Seat of Power? It was to introduce another somewhat endgame feature that takes place during the investor time. That's the avatar of the investor, with a modular palace system that brings powerful effects for players' city optimization, namely the palace. So the palace consists of a main building that you see here at the bottom in the center and wings that the player can freely build. So you have different types of modules, and then as you see with the screenshot in the back, that you can really build beautiful palaces, and you even have a gate where you can feed roads through it. So you can even build real buildings inside of your palace courtyard, so to speak. So you might build a museum inside of your palace courtyard. And you can really decorate it beautifully. So if nothing else, it would be really a great beauty builder feature. But of course, we also want to offer something for other playing styles, and that is the effects and the policies and the buffs. So the palace grants departments effects and policies, and both are powerful buffs that improve various aspects of the gameplay without using items, interestingly. So if you're not an item player and if you don't want to reroll for them or try to amass a lot of them, you can achieve a lot of similar effects with the palace only, or you can use both at the same time and really buff your city even more. So let me tell you some examples here from this screenshot. For example, there's a policy for getting one more item slot for town halls. So normally they only have 3 slots. With that policy, you can have 1 slot more. But if you choose this policy from this green row, you cannot have any other green policies. Here, this policy brings extra grid range for power plants. So you might be able to remove some power plants because the power plants that you have cover everything already with this increased grid range. But similar as before, if you chose this orange one, you cannot choose any of the other orange policies. And last example here, that is plus influence per Zoom module. And with that, they are kind of for free. And if you're struggling with influence, now you really have a lot of influence free that you can use differently. And same as with the other ones, if you choose this purple one, you cannot choose the other ones, which would be, for example, free influence for museum modules. So you really have to choose, do I want that for my zoos or my museums? So let's look at the building challenge, right? Because there's got to be a building challenge in it for an Anno game. So imagine we have an effect that is working on town halls, and here we have our town halls connected with streets, and now it matters where you place the main building of the palace, because the effect is only delivered to town halls in street range. So you see the town halls, the two town halls on the left, they are in street range, they get the effect, great, but the one on the right, that's too far away, so this one doesn't receive the effect. So now we have two elements to this DLC, and I think, but how do you impact them? How do you change them? More departments and policies you get with more attractiveness, while the effect range can only be increased via higher global population. So I think that's really my main aspect that I love about this feature, is that if we display these two things on this graph, so the x-axis is the effect range and the y-axis is the effect variety, and where would the different playing types be placed initially? So where would record players be, for example, you might ask yourself. So record players, when starting the DLC, they would be here. They would have probably a super big range of their palace effects because they have a lot of population, but they can only choose from the first few effects because they didn't spend so much space on beauty building. And where would beauty builders be? Of course, up here on the left. They will have a rather low range of effects because they don't have so much population, but they can choose from all of the effects because they have so much attractiveness on their islands. This, I think, is a very cool mix of requirements that also encourages or pushes maybe the players a little bit to leave their comfort zone and gain even more. Because record builders, up until now, they didn't have to pay attention to attractiveness so much, maybe only for some set effects or so, or for good specialists. But they could become mixed record beauty builders to gain even more different palace effects. And beauty builders, on the other hand, they usually didn't aspire to reach a very high global population amount, but now they are encouraged with the palace system in order to have a wider effect range of all of these buffs. Yeah, that's the Seat of Power DLC presentation from the design aspect. And for the last section of the talk, I would like to talk to you about free updates, because post-launch doesn't only mean paid DLCs, right? Every DLC release was also accompanied by a free update. And how did we approach that? Well, first of all, free updates consist for us of a variety of content, for example, for shortcuts, like finding ruins, quickly unloading a ship, or filling a whole trade route. We also released bigger features for free, like the multiplayer co-op, or the statistics screen where players can double-check production balancing and need fulfillment, or search for items where to get them in the game. A lot of free updates were also quality of life improvements, like the ability to group trade routes or to customize the goods that are displayed at the top bar of every island. And of course, good old bug fixes, right? And the vast majority of this were direct player wishes from the Anno Union or our other social media challenges. I think especially with the example of shortcuts and quality of life improvements, that's mostly things that didn't make it back then to the main game, or that players actually, that we actually found that players use a certain feature maybe a little bit differently, and they need other quality of life or UX ways to interact with this feature. So to conclude this talk, and let me wrap up the main points of this talk. So the Anno 1800's post-launch was about adding long-loved favorites of a team, while also listening to the community, which was often gladly the same thing. We always try to strengthen as many playing types as possible through gameplay, while also spreading out content over the progression of the game. Especially in terms of new regions, is to make it believable, not necessarily realistic. That's not what Anno is striving for in general. And I think especially for strategy games in the broadest sense is to combine and link game systems as much as possible. Think of the Inbesa regions with the scholars that come back to the old world, which have needs from all of the other regions. Don't be afraid to introduce new currencies or voucher systems to bring value to new elements instead of reusing old construction materials, for example. And be sure to care for valuable quality of life improvements with free updates. Most certainly, I would say to keep your game to the modern standards of how it is actually used by your players. Yeah. Thank you very much for listening. That was the talk. We can now go to the Q&A section. And on a last note, we are also hiring. Check out our website for jobs. And now I'm very interested for your questions, everybody.